One of the top stories that we have been tracking on this channel since morning, and it's a big focus on the show today. The Supreme Court today cancelled the early release of the 11 men convicted of raping Bilkis Bano and killing her family during the 2002 Gujarat riots. Remember, the Gujarat government had in fact allowed the early release of the convicts, citing good behaviour. But today, the top court came down hard on the Gujarat government, saying they were not the competent authority to release convicts in a case which was in fact being heard in a separate state in Maharashtra. In fact, the Supreme Court went on to call this a blatant abuse of power. More importantly, while reading out the operative part of the order, Justice BV Nagarathna said that a woman deserves respect no matter what strata of society she belongs to. That brings us to what we are discussing today. What impact does it have if rapists are allowed early release? Is early release of rapists, is that a problematic area? Does this mean there needs to be a relook at the remission order, or the legality of this entire remission process? Joining me on the discussion is Karuna Nandi, lawyer practicing at the Supreme Court, and Jagmati Sangwan, social activist. Thank you to both of you for joining us on the show. Coming first to you, Karuna Nandi, the Supreme Court in fact said, as I mentioned while reading out that operative part of the order, that a woman deserves respect. What kind of an impact did this early release order, do you think, have on women rape survivors?
This is not any old early release order. I think this is very important to remember. This is a matter in which a woman was raped in the most gruesome fashion. Her family members were killed in front of her eyes. And she has pursued the kind of battle against the most powerful people in the country. And including, she's taken on the very state. And she had lost at the Supreme Court level, even though it was glaringly obvious that the CRPC provision in question said that the government that had made the decision to release these rapists didn't even have the jurisdiction to do so. In fact, the case was taken away from the courts concerned in Gujarat because it was felt that she would not get that the just adjudication of the case would not happen because of the environment that was then prevalent in the state, right? So therefore, I think the Supreme Court order, when it came, allowing these very, very gruesome rapists to be released for no good reason outside of the jurisdiction of the government that did decide it, the Gujarat government, with the knowledge of actually the union government. I think it was very disconcerting and dismay to a lot of to women across the country, because the question was then that if such a extreme case cannot get justice, even though she was so persistent, even though she had very good legal representation across her cases for the most part, what hope is there for anybody else? So this judgment today, and Justice Nagarathna and Justice Bhuiyan have been very clear. They have said that rule of law must prevail. And I think that when we look at a very polarized nation, one thing that we must all stand up for together, regardless of what anyone's political views are, is one, the rule of law. Because it can't be based on what affiliation this rapist had or that rapist had, or what this government felt or that government felt. Our courts must stand strong against any of this. And secondly, that violence against women has, for the most part, been a bipartisan issue in this country, and it must become so again.
Right. Jagmati Sangwan, if I can bring you in, if I go on to the legality, the aspect of that a little later, but first coming to you again on the question that I asked, this, as Karuna Nandi was mentioning, that this is not just any other rape case. It is something, a very high profile case, seen as one of the landmark cases that has in fact been going on for several years in our country, and any order related to that would be watched with a lot of interest. So, especially considering the fact that you work with a lot of women, survivors, the fact that these rapists in this very high-profile case got early release because of quote-unquote good behavior, was that something which hit survivors really hard?
Yes, we welcome the judgment of Supreme Court and intervention of Supreme Court from the core of our heart, because the blatant abuse of power by the center or state regimes is not a case in isolation or chance matter. In Bilkis Bano case, it is happening everywhere. In Haryana, Ram Rahim, the rapist and who has been punished in 2-3 cases. But what the Haryana government is doing here, Haryana government affidavit in Ram Rahim case said he is not a hardcore criminal. His conviction in 2 murder cases does not make him a serial killer. And at the same time, what we see, this regime and the state and central governments, they are protecting the rapists and assaulters of sexual crime-like things. In Brij Bhushan case, in Sandeep Singh's case in Haryana, and latest in BHU, what has happened there? These criminals, they raped these girls and then they went for the election campaign there. This protection of these criminals sends the signals to the people at large that you can violate the law, you can violate the dignity of women, you can sexually assault them, and you can roam around freely. This blatant abuse of power in case of Gujarat government is really something very shameful.
Right.
And the decision of the Supreme Court will restore the confidence.
Right. Very important points being made by Jagmati Sangwan there, that it's not just about this particular case. Whether we look at the case of Gurmeet Ram Rahim or even Sandeep Singh, the former Haryana sports minister, you know, time and again we have seen in a way what would seem to the general public double standards when it comes to dealing with some of these accused. Or maybe a more harder, a stronger message needs to be sent out when it comes to such people who have been accused of such crimes. Which brings me to this point, which has in fact been raised by one of the Supreme Court judges while she was in fact reading out the order, is whether or not remission should be granted to accused in heinous crimes. You know, whether a precedent or an example should be set when dealing with criminals or convicts rather in rape cases for that matter. Of course, laws should be, these laws should be accessible to all under trials or convicts for in that case. But when it comes to heinous crimes, even the judge pondered today whether remission should be granted to such accused. Your opinion first on that, Karunanandi.
Look, I think the criminal justice system and how it's operating has to be kept in perspective. At the moment, the largest proportion of people in jail are people who are poor, people who are disproportionately Dalit, tribal, Muslim, and from other disadvantaged communities. Now, does this mean that in principle that remission should be given to those who commit heinous crimes? Absolutely not. Does it mean that one should evaluate whether, in a robust manner, regardless of how high the rapist is or how powerful the rapist is or what his political leanings are, and see whether the person has reformed? Yes. However, we should keep in mind that there are a number of aspects here, right? Which is that when such a heinous crime is committed, then the likelihood that it'll happen again when there is impunity, when there is remission for absolutely no good reason except for these people are powerful and have, influence, right? It means that there not only is there impunity with regard to them being likely to commit the crime again, because let us be clear that rape is the kind of abuse of power and it's the kind of crime that has very, very high rates of recidivism, right? But secondly, and in addition, the problem is that all those watching know that even when there is such a heinous crime, if I have certain kinds of influence, I can get off, right? So, yes, it's a more complicated conversation to say that our criminal justice system must be something that is rehabilitative, right? And that our criminal justice system mustn't look to only punish, must be looking to restore society, first the victim, but also the perpetrator, into make them a better person and not just lock them away and throw the key away. However, in cases where we see remission, the cases where Jagmati ji has, the examples that Jagmati ji has mentioned are not based on rehabilitation for the most part. They're based on privilege. And so where Gurmeet Ram Rahim has been convicted of very, very serious abuses of power, and murder, in fact, for a judge to say that, look, this person should be let off on remission. I mean, it's crazy, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. That is
with the greatest respect to the justice system. The decision, is against all principles of law and is completely out of sync with other principles of law. So, hyperbole notwithstanding, and I apologize for that.
Right.
This is absolutely not a decision that should be on
the legal aspect of this entire remission process is, of course, a very complicated aspect to look at. But if I can just wrap up this discussion with this final question to Jagmati Sangwan, that, the early release of these rapists, these convicts, raise serious questions of morality, administration of justice, and even the perception that justice has been done in this case. Considering, as I mentioned, that this is such a high-profile matter, what lessons should the Gujarat government or any state government, for that matter, take from the way this entire case and this entire release order was handled?
Yes, the state governments and central government also, because the Home Ministry of Center has been complicit in this remission, and they should all take the signals that they cannot rape the rule of law blatantly. And there are people who will fix their accountability, as it has been done in Bilkis Bano case by Subhashini Ali and Ruprekha Verma and other people. Bilkis Bano herself has fought such a brave fight for such a long time, what she has not been through. We want to say that this misuse of power by the state and the center governments would not be tolerated by the people. Yes, for some time they can evade the law, they can evade the procedures, but ultimately the rule of law should prevail, and the people of this country should assert their rights, and they should be aware enough, particularly in the present regime, as the things are going on here.
Right. Jagmati Sangwan, Karuna Nandi there, thank you so much for joining me on this very special discussion that we had. And of course, we'll keep on tracking all the developments in this very important case.